Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us for today's community conversation. We are just about 30 seconds away from go time. We're seeing people showing up on the attendees list and really excited to start today's conversation around building leaders in trades and manufacturing. We'll be starting real soon. All right. It is the top of the hour. Hello, everybody. My name is Phil Gwoke, CEO of BridgeWorks, a generational consulting firm who has been helping organizations around the world bridge these generational divides that often show up as we are communicating with each other as people. And I'll start off by saying our mission is to power potential by cultivating meaningful human connections. Since 1998, we've been doing this. And one of the gaps that we've been observing for quite a while now, in other words, a disconnect, is between meaningful connections with young people, that next generation engaging in careers in trades and manufacturing. And we've been observing this for a long time. For a while now, the message was pursue careers in college. And I'm a product of university training. I love college, but also societies to function need people that can work with their hands. And somehow that message has been lost along the way. And I just want to highlight for you a few examples of kind of how dire this is getting. I'm going to show you some statistics here that just kind of discuss my point here. U.S. Chamber of Commerce recently did a study talking about understanding America's labor shortage. And what the research showed was that as of this, January of last year, the U.S. manufacturing sector has 622,000 unfilled jobs. And what's really interesting about this study is this is accounting for a post-pandemic world where they were able to kind of get about 800,000 people back in the workforce, but we're still having this huge deficit. Now the question is, how is this affecting us as a society? Here's another study out of Workforce. It was pointing out that by the year 2030, there'll be 2.1 million manufacturing jobs that will go unfilled. And this is potentially costing our economy about $1 trillion in lost revenue. So there's certainly a bottom line effect. At BridgeWorks, many times when we work with organizations, we say this content, this information that we're sharing isn't just touchy-feely. We're trying to address real bottom line issues, which then brings us to the question, how is this a generational conversation? Well, according to the United States Census Bureau, nearly 1/3 of manufacturing workers are over the age of 55 years old, and we're having a hard time attracting those younger folks. So as you can see, there's all kinds of challenges and reasons why we bring this conversation to bear. And what was a part of inviting people to join this, we often ask people to, hey, what are some of the questions, what are some of the things that you're wrestling with? And you shared several questions with us that speak to just trying to get leadership to invest in attracting top talent, as well as that recruiting aspect, training them. How do you identify what are the qualities that you want to develop in people? And so we're going to try to get to as many of those as possible. The goal is to give you some insights that will help address these issues. So today, I am really looking forward to this discussion because we are all about solutions. And back in 2018, we held a trade summit at BridgeWorks. And I was introduced to an organization by the name of API Group. Now, up until then, I hadn't heard about them. And what I found so impressive about this organization, and just so you know, API is a global services provider of safety and specialty services to over 500 locations worldwide. So they have a strong global footprint in this space. But when you go to their website to try to learn about what it is they do, every page they talk about why it is they do it. As an organization, they exist to build leaders. And that was such a refreshing approach to the career fields of trades and manufacturing. Let me tell you why I believe this is so important. According to a 2023 Monster survey, they noted that 87% of Gen Z young people entering the workforce value learning and development opportunities, including leadership training, as a top job benefit. In other words, in order to attract that next generation, they want to know that you're going to be there to help lead them and develop their leadership skills. Gen Z expects frequent, constructive feedback from mentors, with 74% in a 2023 Gallup study citing this as an essential element to engage them as a generation. So now that we have an organization that focuses on leadership, the question is, how do you go about doing it on a day-to-day basis? And to help us answer that question, I have invited one of the many great leaders under API's umbrella. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Andy McCleery. He is the president and CEO of Viking Fire Protection Group, one of the many businesses that are under the umbrella of API Group, which is a national leader in fire protection services, and he is a proud member of API Group Incorporated. Furthermore, and you're going to get to see this today, he is a subject matter expert, in my opinion, in the space of developing leaders. So, Andy, hello, how are you doing?
Hey, Phil, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you again, my friend. I'm doing really well. You know, it's summer here in Minnesota, and we can finally go outside and breathe in fresh, non-frigid air. So that always makes me happy.
We have to
Um,
be grateful. Grateful for those days in Minnesota.
Well, we are grateful that you are here today. I know you keep a very busy travel schedule, and I want to begin to tell some folks why I am so excited to have you here. And we're going to touch on some of the embarrassing stuff. I'm going to highlight a few things from your bio that I think are really important for this group to know about you. You've been with Viking since 2011. And from the time that you joined the organization, they were about a $60 million business, and you have grown them to 500 million in revenue, you and your team, but I think you're a strong leader in that space, and expanded to over 30 locations across the United States. You've achieved the top operational excellence award with API Life Safety Group for the past 2 years. And you say you credit this to an emphasis on performance, leadership development, and succession planning. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. But there's a quote out there that I really like. It says, "Everyone wants the view from the top of the mountain, but no one wants the climb." So now that we know a little bit about kind of your recent success, I just want to tell people just a smidgen of the climb that you have gone through to get there. A little bit more background on our guest here. Both you and your wife Heather are graduates of West Point. Both have been deployed on numerous assignments. You served 8 years as an infantry officer. You led numerous units during 6 years in the 101st Airborne Division. You led two company commands during combat operations. You're the recipient of the Bronze Star Medal of Action in Combat. Your final year in the Army, you served with a ceremonial unit known as the Old Guard, which is known for guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. And you have three wonderful kids who apparently are thriving in society. Everything from someone who is just graduated high school to a junior in college, to your oldest child who is a graduate of West Point and a officer in the United States Army right now. So, man, you you are leading in every aspect of life, from the front lines of our military to success in business to married with a family. Well done, my friend. Well done.
That was all the embarrassing stuff, man.
It's the people had to know. The people had to know. But now I want to start hearing a little bit more about what's going on at API Group as it relates to this commitment to developing leaders. And again, this is so refreshing because most business I work with, when you go to their website, they say, "This is what we do." But you focus on why you do it. And so my first question, I just want to know, how has this commitment to building leaders at API and specifically at Viking Fire Protection, how has it affected retaining and engaging your staff, all ages? I mean, what's the impact on the front lines?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I'm really glad to be here to share. And I guess I would just say up front, for sure. It's not like we have all the answers. I mean, we've been on a journey for a long, long time. It's funny. Our CEO of API Group was on Jim Cramer earlier this week, and I want to say 3 or 4 times, Cramer was asking him questions about this financial thing, that financial thing, and probably 4 times in the course of that conversation, Russ, continued to shift back to our commitment of building leaders. And it was kind of funny for me to watch, how Kramer would respond to that. I don't know that he knew how to take that, but that's who we are. And but that's evolved. And we started, I'll say in the early 2000s on this journey to start investing in our leaders across all aspects of our organization. But, in those early years, probably like a lot of companies, we were focusing more on senior leaders. And then over time, we started to ask ourselves the questions, well, why aren't we investing more in our frontline field leaders and folks on the shop floor? And so it's for sure been an evolution. You ask about how does it impact retention and engagement and things like that. I mean, there's no question that it's helped over time. I mean, our turnover is, I would say, best in class. When we look at stats, we can see, we do annual engagement surveys, and we can see, our performance compared to other benchmark groups, and it's, I think it shows up in the numbers. But at the end of the day, Phil, for us, it's more, just how we view, every individual, as an individual, and it's really not about the engagement numbers or it's just, investing in each of our people as people, and we just believe that. And I do think it shows up. I do think there's an ROI. But I think, we call it within API the care factor, and it's just, the deeply rooted belief that, we need to care in each other as individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. And here was, I mean, reading your bio and just being familiar with, the credibility that background brings is incredibly impressive. But what stood out to me, last October, you invited me to come and present to a handful of the leaders that you were working with. And so, these are, I think it was predominantly men. There might have been a woman or two in that room, but mostly guys on the front lines of, fire protection services, installing, in what do you call it? Not insulation, the
Sprinkler systems. Yeah. It was
yeah,
all
sprinkler
our,
systems.
that was
Thank you,
that
right?
was probably 50 of our field leaders, that were,
Right.
it's got guys and gals from all across the country, that we had brought in to, for exactly what we're talking about, is investing in them as leaders.
And one by one, we're sitting in the back of the room, and one by one, you're telling me, well, this guy, he's been with us for so long, and we've been working with him on this and that. And just, I could tell what you just said was so true. You know each of your people individually, their needs, and how to grow them. And what was incredible was you had them leading portions of this meeting. And again, these aren't folks who are trained presenters or, motivational speakers and live in the space that I do, but you're putting them in positions to grow them in that space. And it just, you could tell the pride that they had as they were, asked to step up in these roles, pride and ownership because they were leading each other. And it was just really very, very impressive. So again, I just say that because folks don't know what you just said is real. You're living it out day in and day out. So my question now.
If I could say one thing quick on that, 10 years ago, we started, let's say 10 years ish, we were bringing this group of field leaders together. And it was, in those early days, I would say some of those conversations were pretty tactical, and we weren't as focused on leader development. And over the last several years, it's been more and more. And to your point, now they're running it themselves, and we're able to be in the background. And that's been a really fun evolution. When you see these leaders growing, and like you said, for a lot of our men and women in the field, they haven't been invested in that way, and they haven't had the opportunity to lead, say a 3-day conference, with their peers, and that's a big step for a lot of them. So yeah, that's a fun evolution for sure.
Yeah, and it was amazing to see. And again, that pride and ownership, and I think engagement in it. Most of the time, when for organizations that probably do have some leadership development, it's a lot of sit and get. you're the expert. You're going to teach these, folks what they need to know. And you are an expert, but you growing them to be able to teach each other. And I think it was truly impressive. So I want to hear about your journey, right? Talk to us about, because no one, you have this military background, this, professional, um, CEO experience now, but kind of walk us through a little bit about how you grew in this space and, why it became important to you to develop leaders.
Sure. Yeah. So, I think just like everybody on the call, everybody's got their journey and how they sort of develop their worldview and their style. And um, I for sure have that. Whether it was playing sports as a kid or I was very active in scouting. And then I go to West Point, and it's West Point. For those that don't know on the call, it's that institution is set up to develop leaders for the future in the military, and there is a heavy focus on developing you as a leader. A lot of that is sort of practical knowledge that you work on and practice while you're there, but it's really not until you get to your first units where you get to put it into play for real. And when I got to my first units, I would say that I was doing pretty well as a young lieutenant, and I think we're having some success. But it really wasn't until I worked with a guy by the name of Jerry Wilson, who was the brigade command sergeant major, who really started to instill in me this concept of growing your people. And at that time, I was a captain. And this is a picture of Jerry. So, if you notice one thing about Jerry, I would point it out in this picture, is that his head is just about hitting the door frame. And so Jerry was a mountain of a man, and he was about 6'6", probably 250 pounds. And he was, for those that weren't in the military, don't fully understand the military, the command sergeant major is the highest ranking non-commissioned officer in the unit. And so he's kind of the crusty guy that's seen everything, and he'd probably forgotten everything about the Army that I was ever going to know. And I mean, he was that guy, and he's a pretty hardcore guy. And every time he'd see me, at this point I was a captain, he'd say, "Well, Captain McCleery, what are you doing to grow your people?" And I would respond initially in the early days. I'd give him some sort of response about the technical training or the tactical training we were doing for our guys to get them ready for combat. And he'd say, "No, Captain McCleery, you're not hearing me. What are you doing to grow your people?" And it didn't take me long to realize that what Sergeant Major Wilson was asking was, what was I doing to invest in our people as individuals? What was I doing to get them ready to be that next sergeant, that next platoon sergeant, that somebody who would be maybe his successor down the road, and really focusing on their personal growth and their journey, and not just about the next live fire training exercise and what we were doing for some combat drill. And but that was his deal. Every time I saw him, "Captain McCleery, what are you doing to grow your people?" And he became a mentor to me in those early years. And I share this story. I didn't used to share this story at all, because I hate to say or share this, but Jerry Wilson was killed on November 23rd, 2003 in Iraq on our deployment during the invasion. And that was tough for the guys and gals in the brigade. I mean, he was a man that people really respected and loved. And so I share that story. Probably the last 10 years, I've shared that more and more with people on our team when I'm just trying to drive home, this is who we are. And before I started sharing that, every company I've led within API, we've always had strategic goals, and one of our strategic goals has been to grow our people. I just didn't always share people the backstory, but Jerry Wilson has always been a guy that's kind of in my life, planted that seed of what are we doing to do that next level investment, and really looking at the individual and trying to make sure that we're growing them. So yeah, Jerry's a mentor to me for sure.
Wow. Well, I should have mentioned this earlier, but thank you for your service, and to all our military personnel. And in this case, someone who paid the ultimate sacrifice. We're just honored for the freedom and the lessons and the example that they give us. Appreciate you sharing that.
He's yeah, it's I have mixed feelings every time I share that story, because it's, I have a sadness that I carry, but I also, I think about how many lives he changed, and he's like I said, he's a mountain of a man.
Yeah. And to continue to pose that question till you understand it, understanding a little bit about the chain of command. You're a captain, he's an NCO, so he's respectfully, no, Captain McCleary,
Yeah.
what do you
Oh
do to
yeah.
grow your people? Till all of a sudden you begin to
He wasn't
internalize.
afraid. He wasn't afraid to give you, to push on you. And that's the thing about a sergeant major, is they can do that. I mean, like
Yeah.
I said, that guy had forgotten more about the Army than I was ever going to know. And I think he took that as his personal responsibility, is make sure that the officers, and I think that's what we're sitting here talking about today, Phil, is what are we doing to invest in our, in our leaders, and that's leaders across all aspects of our business, and not looking at, our men and the women in the field as, a set of hands, and not looking at them as somebody who we're not going to share the blueprints with until, they've been in the trade for 6 or 7 years. I mean, that's kind of an old school mindset, and I think that's what we're talking about, is how do we ramp them up to speed faster, and better, and invest in them and as individuals.
So let's get into that, practically, Captain McCleary. How do you grow your people? I imagine, back then as a officer in the Army, United States Army, and today as a leader with a large business, what were the numbers there? 500 million dollars in revenue, if I remember that correctly, or that's a lot of responsibility, just business wise. And it was interesting you shared the story with Russ being interviewed. Most of us just think about that business aspect, but how do you balance the responsibilities as a leader and growing your people? Like, just practically, what does that look like? How do you day in, day out make that happen?
Well, I think, I mean, for us, it's, you have to be committed to it, and we spend our budget, to invest in leaders every year is substantial. And so we have a commitment that's, that we can show financially, as well as time, and you have to put the time into it. And so I think it is, I guess I would just share so that the audience knows, we've got locations all across the US and across the world. And so from a complexity standpoint, how do you do that? I mean, I think it's, there are a lot of ways to do it. One of the simplest ones, you put up this picture of Joe Anderson. When I knew Joe, he was a colonel. When if you notice his uniform there, he's got 3 stars on it. So this gentleman was the best officer I ever worked for in the Army. And I deployed with him, commanded a couple of companies for him in combat, and I learned a lot from him. And you'd think that probably the top thing that would stand out to me from all the stuff I did with him, would have been something combat related, or something along those lines. But the number one thing that I took away from Joe Anderson, from working with him for, I'll say 3 years, was that his dedication to coaching us as coaches of others, it never stopped. It started from the moment he took over the regiment. We were supposed to do, in the Army, we were supposed to do this thing called quarterly counselings. And the reality is nobody did it. And those counselings would feed into your annual review. So probably a lot like the business world, a lot of the folks listening in have got some sort of annual review process, and within that, you're supposed to do some sort of check-ins throughout the year. I think a lot of companies don't do that, and then they do an annual review, and then the person on your team is wondering, well, how did I get to, where I'm sitting from a performance standpoint? Well, the Army was kind of like that until this guy came into our regiment, and he made it mandatory that every single quarter we actually had to submit our quarterly counseling packets to him, and he would review those. He would mark them up with a red pen, and he'd send them back. And it stood out to me. Initially I was like, man, we just have to do this. But then it started to stand out to me that he was putting so much care and energy into coaching us to be better coaches. And this was in garrison before we deployed during the invasion in Iraq. So he was doing that in garrison. But then we go to the invasion in Iraq. We start in Kuwait. We fight through Najaf. We go to Karbala. We go to Baghdad, and we end up in Mosul. And so we're, you can think about, these, 2,000 guys fighting from here to here to here. And yet all through this, what are we still doing? And actually I found one of these because I was talking to a different group about this, but this is one of the quarterly counseling packets that I submitted to this man every single quarter, even during combat. And so, if we think we're too busy in the business world to sit down with our people once a quarter and check in and say, hey, what are your goals for the upcoming quarter? How do we do on our goals for the last quarter? What are some areas I can help you? If we think we're too busy to do that in the business world, but yet this man wasn't too busy in the middle of a combat zone during the invasion, to do that, so I've always kept that, and that's something that I brought, with me right away. I think I shared with you when I came to API, I ended up taking over a company essentially right away. And so I was really green. I knew what I knew from the Army. I didn't know a lot. I didn't know a lot about finance. I had a lot to learn. But I thought I knew people and leadership. And one of the things I brought right away was what, Joe Anderson taught me, is just the importance of sitting down quarterly, with your people and talking to them about their goals, both personal and professional, and keeping that cadence. And that seems like a really simple thing. And maybe some of the companies that are online today are doing a great job of that. But, in our experience, that's actually a difficult discipline and cadence to have. And I think if you could just do one thing, it would be to, get your leaders across your organization to sit down with those that report to them and have quarterly discipline conversations about just what's going well, what's not going well, how can I help, and it's not that hard. But if you do that, you can really invest in your people, and it helps the business because there's alignment.
How and maybe it varied, but how long of a conversation does that tend to be on these quarterly?
That's a great question, because that's probably one of the biggest reasons why people don't do it, is they're like, oh my gosh, that's going to take time, and it's like, if you've got however many direct reports, you have to be purposeful and carve out the time to do that. So for me, if I'm doing that with the folks that report to me directly, I'm carving out an hour for each conversation. Okay. And I do it once a quarter. And the way I, not to get too tactical, but the way I do it, just to hold myself accountable, is I put it on the company calendar as a block of a couple of weeks. I ask people to sign up for time with me, and we do it. But it's an hour per person. And so that's an investment of my time in them. But what I get back as a leader is I get, they come to me with what their goals are for the next quarter. I get a chance to see, by listening to their goals, how aligned are they with the organization. I also get a chance to listen to, maybe what their personal goals are and how can I help them with that. Or, there's been plenty of people that have worked for me that are now working, in positions of greater responsibility with an API. And because I listened to them, I'm sitting down with them quarterly, I can help position them to take that next step. And so there's so many benefits that come and that are time saving if you just invest that hour, in each individual each quarter. So I've actually been doing, I've been really focused in the last couple of years of kind of doing what Joe did for me, is collecting the packets and marking them up and doing a better job of coaching the coaches. Because if you really think, that's what he was doing. When you get to that more senior level, and now it's not so much about me sitting down just with my direct reports, it's how am I scaling that across all of the organization and ensuring that all my branch leaders and office leaders are doing, a good job of it. So.
Yeah. Well, I love the practicality of that. That's what I think folks are looking for. Hopefully we've kind of demonstrated the outcome, the value, the return on investment, if you will, is there because people are getting a consistent development and they believe in it. It's to hear you share that taking place in a combat zone definitely puts my challenges in perspective, right? Because we're all busy and we all have reasons why. Oh, we just don't have enough time this quarter. We'll meet again next quarter. And if you can do that in the middle of combat, there's no, I think, civilian reason why we can't be consistent with our people now. And yet, so it sounds like that was woven into you, and now you're passing it on, even growing your own ability and with the red checks and kind of making sure that it happens with your coaches so that they get those skills kind of improving.
Let me share one quick example, that just happened a couple months ago. So my Rochester branch leader was sharing with me that he had a field leader who he was really impressed with, and she was a relatively new alarm technician. So kind of to your point about men and women in the field, and are we really investing in them and listening to them, as leaders? So my Rochester branch leader sat down with her for one of these quarterly coaching conversations. And through the course of this conversation, she brought up some things that she had been seeing in her first, say, year working with Viking that she thought could be improved. And because they were having this quarterly cadence of checking in, he said, what, why don't you put down some of your ideas and bring it back to me. We'll check in on that. And so she did. Well, he was so impressed, as he told me this, he was so impressed with her that then he said, hey, I really think you have a potential to be in the office and maybe helping to lead this department. And he told me that her response was like, well, I don't think that's really for me. And he's like, no, I think we can work on, some of the leadership skills that you think you might need, but you've got great ideas, and we really think that you've got the potential to do this. And so, fast forward 6 months or so, now she's in the office, she's running a team. And how did this all happen? It's because of the quarterly cadence of leaders sitting down, with leaders and listening. And we have countless examples of that. It's just, again, this seems like a really tactical thing, and maybe some people do that already, and it's great. But in my experience, a lot of people don't have the discipline of sitting down, quarterly, and just kind of checking in and listening to their people across all levels. And this was a gal who had brand new employee, started in the field. Now she's running a department.
Which brings up another question, because again, I think in various professions, and I think the wrong assumption, especially in trades and manufacturing, is it's different than, say, corporate. But my question is, who was a leader? What constitutes a leader? Because like you just identified, this person was, new hire, and next thing you know, or someone's identifying some skill here, and they didn't even see themselves as a leader, not until they were put in a position to show their talent, and here they are. So who's a leader?
Yeah, well, my response already, because you're getting familiar with API. We have a belief that everybody is a leader, and that's just something that we believe deeply. And so when you think about our definition of leadership, it's somebody that has the ability to influence, others positively towards the success. And so the key word there is the ability to influence others. And so sometimes people get so hung up on, do they have direct reports or not? I can remember going toe to toe back in the day, 15, 20 years ago with a guy who was helping API build out some of the leadership training. And this individual was adamant that you were not a leader unless you had direct reports. And I couldn't disagree with him more. And I'm really proud to say where we're at in API. I mean, we believe that everybody is a leader. Everybody has the ability to influence others. It doesn't matter if you have direct reports or not. So you could be a purchasing person. Well, every single day you have the ability to influence the key suppliers and vendors and partners that you're working with. You have the ability to influence the jobs and, the timeliness and the correct orders. I mean, everybody has the ability to influence others. And therefore, in our mind, you have the ability to be a leader. And yeah, so, I mean, that's how we view it.
I love that answer. And we talked a little bit about this before. Leadership guru John Maxwell says all leadership is influence, and you boiled it down to simply that. And so I think we need to remind ourselves everyone is worth investing in as a leader. You don't have to wait till they have a report or a job title or whatever. And I think, again, going back to those studies we talked about with this next generation, being grown, being mentored is incredibly important to their what they're looking for in a career path. And so I think, again, there's so many studies out there that talk about how few from that generation are looking to these types of industries as career paths. But if they began to believe, wow, this is a great place where everyone will be invested in, will be grown, will be mentored, And again, I know you do that so well at Viking and at API Group, but hopefully those that are watching this will begin to, maybe think, what's an area that we can begin to improve in this space? And I think I talked with Russ back in 2018, and I remember asking him a little bit about, you mentioned API has been on this journey. You started with just people leaders, then you kind of expanded it out to, anyone under the umbrella, like everyone should be grown. And you have like online training that people do. I mean, there's lots of different ways that people can access or get mentorship. Can you speak to any of the, so you talked about the quarterly meetings. Are there any other like kind of, I don't know, like tactical things that folks or companies or leaders can implement to really remind people that we're here to grow everyone in their leadership skills?
Yeah. Well, I think like specific to mentoring, I feel like I would be lying to this group if I said that we had that completely figured out. I think we're getting
Okay.
better and better and better. I think I'm specifically thinking about the field right now. So
Okay.
we're a union contractor, and I think so we'll say our alarm teams are non-union, and our sprinkler fitters are union. And culturally within the union sprinkler fitters, that was not a strong mentoring culture in the sense that we might think of it, like put your arm around the shoulder of that young guy or gal and really be wanting to invest in them and coach them up. I mean, it used to be, like I said, hey, we'll show you the blueprints, in a couple of years, when it was not a strong mentoring culture in that sense. And I really see that shifting, I think, in a really, really good way in the last several years, even within the union halls and the training centers. I mean, I just think that the trades in general are really pushing exactly what you're talking about. Is we have to change in terms of how we view, young people coming into the trades, and our desire to ramp them up, quickly as individuals. And I think that's a great thing. I also think that people are going to be coming back to the trades. I mean, I think we've got a lot of opportunity in the trades, and that's, to me, is very exciting. I just think when you look at, the mentoring aspect, I just see the momentum within our company. I think you get a lot of our longtime field leaders that see, I guess the simplest way to say it, Phil, is that probably 50% of the time when we send our key field leaders to some sort of leadership training, I'll hear that helps them more in their personal life than it did even in the business.
Wow.
And so I love when I hear that, because it's like, again, we're investing in these individuals as people and folks on our team. And if it helps on the business side, great. But if they come back and say, man, I went to this leadership training and it's like, you don't even know how much this helped me as a father and as a husband, like that is a beautiful thing, because the more and more they get bought in on that, and the more and more they're going to go and continue to give to that next generation, and just change that mindset of mentoring and coaching. And one thing I hear sometimes is that culturally and on the job sites, the guys used to all sit around the lunch, and talk to each other, and now they're kind of glued to the phones.
Yeah.
Because the phone is there. And so I think creating conversations and creating dialogue is a challenge that we need to kind of crack the code on. We've been talking about that inside of our teams, is just generationally, how do we do a better job of creating that atmosphere that we used to have on job sites, where people knew each other more deeply and were having personal conversations, because a lot of that has changed, because guys and gals are glued to their phone, when they're on break. So there's so much we could talk about on that front that is just like generational and mentoring and coaching. But I just think, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was going to agree with you that what you just shared, there are probably 3 or 4 major nuggets that I want to just address real quickly. One, when you said investing in people, their leadership skills, they find personal benefit, right? Now, again, regardless of your generation, who doesn't want to benefit personally? But there's a global study right now that Gen Z, 98% of them are suffering from burnout in the workplace. There's just such a disconnect from the environment they grew up in and what the expectations are in the workplace that it's overwhelming. And so this is a nugget where you invest in someone, all of a sudden they experience personal benefit. Hopefully that equips them to deal with some of the challenges. They're embracing work-life harmony, and all of a sudden, man, because my company developed me as is growing me as a leader, I'm feeling better in my personal life. I'm more engaged in this work, right? There's a huge return on investment there. And I remember we did talk when you had me out at your space in October that talked about that, those lunch break talks are being disrupted by these devices that we're also connected to. I'm blessed to have, 4 kids who are all Gen Z. The youngest in our family, she's just finished her junior year of high school, so she'll be a senior next year. But there's kind of a movement, even within that group, where they're tired of spending time on their phones. She downloaded an app that told her if she continued this current phone use, how much time would she spend on her phone over the rest of her life? And the answer came back 21 years. And she
Yeah.
said, "That's it, I'm done." So this app helped her kind of shut down some of the other apps that she uses too much, and she wants to re-engage with life. So again, the timing couldn't be better to really develop mentorship programs because human beings are wanting to reconnect with other human beings. And I think having a strategy and a purpose and intent in place to do so is going to be key to engaging and retaining the next generation. So love everything you just said. um, all right. We're just a few minutes away from, I want to open up to questions to anyone who's on the call that they might have, either myself or Andy, but a couple of the things that I wanted to get to, and you kind of something that you said, it triggered this thought, and I can't remember what it was, but exactly. But the question is, have you dealt with anyone on your teams, maybe some of those coaches that you're coaching, who just really don't want to invest the time in building leaders? They're more concerned with installing the alarms or installing the sprinkler systems or whatever other responsibilities they have, that this isn't a big priority to them, even though it is a priority to you. How do you motivate that person who doesn't see the point?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I think that there's always, just to be, I guess, to be clear, I think of two things there. One, sometimes when you're sitting down with folks and having conversations, coaching conversations about what's next for them, some people don't want what's next for them. They may, we may have a designer that's a great designer, and he or she, that's what they want to do. And that's actually a great thing. Like, we all need folks on the team that are happy in their role, and I think that doesn't mean that we can't continue to invest in them in that role and their ability to be a better leader within that role, though. And so to try to not confuse somebody being happy in their role with not wanting to continue to invest in them as a leader within their role, so that's one thing, maybe that I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but I feel like I see that sometimes, is that, somebody may want to be in their role and in that lane, and that's actually a beautiful thing, but that doesn't mean that we can't invest in them. And really, that there's a lot of things that you can do to continue to invest in them as leaders in the organization. Sometimes you'll have somebody that doesn't want to invest in others. I mean, maybe that's what you're getting at, is like you may have somebody who has some direct reports, and they're like, hey, I don't want to put that time into doing that. And that, I would say, generally, when we have that type of situation, if somebody has direct reports and they don't want to invest in others, culturally, there might be a little bit of a conflict there that we're going to have to work through. I mean, I think it's kind of a prerequisite, at least within Viking and API, that if you're in a position of responsibility, I go back to Jerry Wilson, what are you doing to grow your people? I mean, if you're not sort of on that, if you're not on that train of understanding the commitment, to invest in others, then that's, at least for us, that's a little bit of a cultural clash. I mean, if you're in a position where you do need to be investing in others, it's sort of not an optional event here. And I just think that we think it's so important. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody understands how to invest in others, and we have to coach them up. Sometimes it's just a matter of they've never been asked to really do that. And there are a lot of things we could talk about on that. Is just how do you coach the coaches, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's really a big part of what we're doing is trying to teach. We look at it with an API as three pillars: leading self, leading others, leading businesses and teams. And so there's three main areas that our leadership programs sort of go into. And so when you think about that designer who maybe only wants to be a designer for the next 10 years, they're kind of in that leading self pillar. There's still a
Yeah.
lot of things you can do to lead yourself.
Mm.
If you're leading others and teams and businesses, there are a lot of things and a lot of skill sets that you continue to pick up to better lead others and teams.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so the second part of your answer was the direct question that I was getting to, and you spoke to, hey, maybe this isn't a culture fit because there's
Yeah,
a
I hate to say it that way, but I mean it's not an
no.
optional event. If you're in a position of responsibility, and again, I tried, actually, believe it or not, I try not to bring too much military into the business world, but one more military thing is in my mind, if the company commander goes down and the company fails, then was that company commander successful or not? In my
Mm,
mind, that's absolutely not. He may have had a great company while he was there, but if that company commander goes down in combat and then the company falls apart, then that company commander was not a good company commander.
right.
And so we have to have the mindset that it's not about us, it's about the team, and what are we doing to develop others, because we may not be there tomorrow.
Yeah. So, oh man, so thank you for adding that story because the whole culture fit with ROI. In other words, I have organizations. In fact, I've got one I'm coming to present to pretty soon, and like they want to have a talk about succession planning. And I think
Yep.
most organizations they only think about it when all of a sudden, oh my goodness, wait a minute, the company commander's going down or
Right.
retiring soon. We need to put a plan in place. But it sounds like as a part of your culture you're always succession planning because you're always developing people. And that way it's not an emergency down the road. It's an ongoing just the atmosphere, the culture that you set is constantly creating succession planning. But the
Yeah,
other thing,
that's correct. I mean,
yeah,
you and I have talked about this, but we take teams out to Gettysburg once a year,
yeah,
and at Gettysburg, you say, well, why do we do that? Because we take people out and we use the battlefield as a source of metaphors, and we tie it back to the business world. So there's 10 stops on the battlefield that we stop at, and one of them is a specific spot where a general, was killed. He got to the battlefield and he was widely viewed to be one of the best generals that was coming into the fight, and he was there 1 minute and he was gone the next. And so we have a very specific conversation with the leaders that are there about succession planning, and kind of what I just laid out for you is like, what are we doing to be ready? Uh, and it's just, yeah, that's a culturally, we've taken probably 300, 350 Viking employees to that leadership experience at this point. And, uh, we do that because people remember stories. You can sit in a conference room and that's great. Conference room training is good, but when you're out walking in the battlefield, people remember those stories and they remember the emotion. And yeah, the culture of succession planning is a big thing for us. You mentioned earlier in the intro, we do a lot of acquisitions, and so a lot of times the companies that come to Viking, the owner may not have a succession plan, and that's an area where we're very good at helping. But that only is a possibility if you're building leaders, who are ready to step up.
mhm. Uh, we're going to open up to questions here. So if you have questions, I think we have the yeah, here we go. So the Q&A can work, or you can use the chat. We want to hear anything that's on your mind that we've addressed or haven't addressed that you want to speak to. But I want to thank you too, Andy, when you mentioned, it wasn't even my question, but it was such an important point that some people, they don't want to take that, they don't want to become leaders necessarily or take on that responsibility. It might take them 10 years before they see themselves in that space. Um, and we've seen that. I've heard that of a lot of young professionals where in the past, the goal when I entered this organization was to climb the ladder of success and one day have the corner office. Well, a lot of people realize with new levels come new devils. I love what I do. I don't want to take that responsibility, but it sounds like within your organization, you say, no problem. you are a leader of self. We're still going to help develop your self leadership. And so there's a place for everybody, which also speaks to customizing or designing an environment where everyone is growing, but just at the pace and rate that fits to them, which I love. So I think we posed it out there. Let me see, make sure I'm not missing any Q&A. How do you convince management to invest in their talent? This was a question that came up. So in your case, your management, so you are, I'm sure, invested, but how would you answer that as a business? You're a partner in a very large organization. I imagine some leaders do want to invest in this, others don't, or maybe just from other experience. How would you speak to that question, Andy?
Oof, that's a good one. It's been so long since I've been in, where we haven't had that mindset of we're just going to do this. I guess I would just say, I think, without knowing the specific situation of the individual that asked that question, I think I would try to look for bright spots of examples of where you have invested in the past, within your organization. I mean, the question was, how do you convince management? So I guess if I'm putting myself in that person's shoes, I think I would try to think of areas where maybe you have made that investment in the past and it's gone well, and try to highlight that, for your leadership team, and as a part of the ask of why you want to do more, and I think that would be one approach. And then the other approach would be, this might be easier said than done, is just do it yourself and take ownership of what you can control. And so sometimes we get so fixated on, what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. I mean, if it's the right thing and you have the ability to do certain things at whatever level you are in the organization, I guess that would be my other piece of advice, without knowing specifics, is, what can you do on your own without needing to go and get permission, and do it, and see how it goes, and keep investing in others, because, that's at the core of what we're talking about today, is the belief that everybody should have the opportunity to be invested in as a leader, whether that's personally or professionally. And you may not need to get permission from your management to do that. You may just think you need to, but maybe there's things you can be doing, at your level to just do it.
Yeah. And I think something you said there really key is, if you believe it's the right thing, you've got a strong reason. One of the things in our generational work, when you're trying to wield influence, which is we've identified as a key aspect of leadership, all leadership is influence, or build trust, get someone to believe in your idea, understanding what motivates them, what their reason is for resistance. Is it, we can't afford it right now, when you're thinking we can't afford not to do this, things are changing so fast and so forth. And then I like what Andy said, like you have a reason why you believe this is really powerful, but think through why they're, speak to their reasons why they think it's not, and address them, and then lean into what you can do, especially if you have the ability, any budget under your belt to make it happen. Document it, follow through real
Yeah.
closely,
The
verify
quarterly counseling, that I talked about, Phil, is free. I mean, that's just you investing your time and your individuals that are on your team. So there are things that can be done to invest in leaders that are not, taking the team to Gettysburg. That's a financial investment, and there's maybe some approvals or whatever that need to happen there. But there are a lot of things. That's why I said the second thing was kind of the just do it. I mean, what things can you control, and what can you start to do? And I love what you said about believe. I mean, every year at Christmas, I give out a book to our branch leaders, and probably 5 years ago for the holidays, I gave out Extreme Ownership. And chapter 3 is believe. And I mean, you gotta believe it,
Absolutely. There's a couple of generational questions in here. I'm just curious. Well, first of all, Andy, underneath Viking Fire, what's the total number of, I don't know, team members, staff members, employees, whatever the term you use, that's under your leadership umbrella?
We're at about 1,500.
Okay, so I thought it was a pretty significant number of folks, and so you've been with them since 2011, so coming up on whatever the math is,
Almost 15 years. Yep.
yeah. And the question is, are you doing anything differently? Have you modified the way that you attract, folks today than say maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, or have you seen any need to?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think talent acquisition is something that we've been talking about for quite some time. And I just think we, specifically in our world, bringing on new designers, and then also folks in like technicians, alarm technicians, inspectors. That's just an area that we're growing so quickly that we're just working hard at talent acquisition. And so we never really had somebody that was focused specifically on that as a role within our company, and we do now. Even
Okay.
at the API level, we have a couple of talent acquisition leaders, and so yeah, I mean, I would say we're building out a more robust hiring and talent acquisition team than we ever had. Uh, One of the unique challenges for us, maybe it's not unique for folks on the line, is just having multi offices, multi branches. I mean, there's a culture at Viking, there's a culture at API, but that's every branch office. Our office in Mobile, Alabama, is not the same as our office in Duluth.
Right.
And the size isn't the same, the amount of people, personalities, and so how do we have that consistency in how we view, some of the things we've talked about today across all of these offices with different leadership styles. And it's not like everybody's a clone. And I guess that gets back into your talent pieces, that those offices are still doing the hiring for them, and they're
Mhm.
still the ones that have to build that environment and that culture that people want to be a part of. And so that's probably one of our larger challenges, is we're a very decentralized organization, and we kind of like it that way. We really like for those offices to feel like they're running their own deal.
Yeah.
Uh, but in the same breath, we have to try to provide them resources and help them, with things like talent acquisition, for sure.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've brought some people on specifically to do that role that you wouldn't have had in the past, and I think that speaks to, there's there's a time, well, even 15 years ago, we saw a decline in folks enrolling in trades and manufacturing positions, but it seems to continue to slide further and further down the hill. So having people focused on that is key. I can't speak for Viking or API, but one of the bits of advice that we kind of speak to is, when you're trying to attract talent, understanding, one shift that we've motivated organizations to just take some time to understand is, what's the reason why someone would want to come and work for you? When I was starting my career back in the early 90s, graduated from college, as a Gen Xer, our whole mindset was we want to be our own boss. Independence was really key. Well, that message isn't what's going to resonate with young people coming seeking employment now. But I do think a lot of things that we've talked about here today, and again, I encourage everyone, just take 5 minutes, pop on the API's website, or go to Viking, and you will see when they talk about their committed to developing leaders, every page, everywhere you click, every mission statement is all about that. And I think if folks saw that, wow, it's almost like a leadership development organization disguised as safety service providers. Like, that's just yeah, I do that job and I'm really growing as a person. I think that's an attractive thing. So understanding what's going to attract that next group is really key. Some thoughts from myself. All right, we're down to just a couple minutes here. So Andy, any just last thought, bit of advice, insight, or something you want to leave our folks with today?
Well, I guess I would just leave it with, we're talking about investing in the field leaders and folks that are boots on the ground. And that's why I came to API. Actually, believe it or not, back in 2006, when I left the military, I was looking for what I thought would be kind of a blue collar type organization. And I couldn't tell you exactly why, but that's what I just thought I wanted. And I remember coming to API and meeting with Russ Becker, who's still the CEO. And
Oh,
I didn't know anything about fire protection. I didn't know anything about API, but I remember calling my wife saying I really like these people and the culture. And fast forward 20 years, and I think you just said, I mean, this has been an evolution for us, but I guess if I could leave a couple things with the group, it's the importance of investing in people as individuals, at all levels of the organization is huge because it's the care factor, and that's if you're really thinking about ROI, that's what's going to help people understand that you care about them as an individual and be loyal to you and your team. And we have so many longtime guys and gals in our field crews, and really generational. We've got second and third generation, and you think about recruiting, and if you look at our field teams, Phil, it's how'd you get into the trade? Well, my uncle or my dad or my mom, and that's a lot of what the trades are, and that's a sign of success right there. So we want to keep investing in all of our people, and yeah, I really appreciate you having me on today.
Hey, thanks so much for your time again, for your service, for your insights, your wisdom, and just being an all-around good guy. It's been an honor just partnering with you and knowing you. As we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and let you know we are going to be continuing these community conversation series and more of a podcast format as BridgeWorks evolves. And so here's just a snapshot of some of the upcoming conversations that we've got teed up. Our next session, we're going to be talking about millennials managing up. Generation has 2 decades of work experience underneath their belt. They are phenomenal leaders, but we want to talk with a couple of millennial leaders on how they are handling this task of working with people who have maybe 10, 15, 20 years more experience in the workplace. How do you guide? How do you influence? How do you lead? Talk about going back to the office. BridgeWorks, we now are back in the office, and a lot of organizations are doing the same. So what's that like in a post-pandemic world? We're going to talk about AI, technology, how that's changing the future of work. So several great conversations coming up. Looking forward to seeing you there. And until then, be well, my friends, and thank you for participating. Have a great day. All right, have we stopped the recording?